Hello, this is Matt O'Leary, and this is it. This is the big one, my top 30 albums of 2025. AI music was one of, if not the biggest storyline in music from the year. We got a little inkling of AI in the industry in 2024, and then it really exploded this year. But it turns out there were some real humans making music as well this year, and yeah, I'm going to give you the ones I think are the most worthy of recognition and the ones that most deserve to live on well beyond 2025. If you like progressive rock, anything indie, alternative, then there will be something for you in this list. But really, if you're just open minded about music and are kind of genre agnostic, then this list is also for you. One more thing, just really quick before I dive in. I'm doing a vinyl giveaway raffle right now where two lucky winners will each win two records at the end of the year. So details on how to enter are in my last video and down in the description box. All right, it's finally time. Let's do this. I'm going to cover numbers 30 through 11 in this video, and then my top 10 albums of the year will be in the next one. Number 30 just snuck onto the list in the last month or so. This is a member of one of my favorite musical discoveries of the past few years, the band Improvement Movement. It's Born Too Soon by Tony Aparo. We have so little time enough as it is. It follows that an album with such a handcrafted energy wouldn't be on streaming platforms. This thing is largely acoustic, it's got very organic textures, the instrumentation is pretty simple. And like bandmate Clark Sound's record, it's got this 70s stripped down folk singer-songwriter thing going on. Also a 70s soft rock sound that you'll know pretty well if you know Improvement Movement. Ultimately a little too abbreviated to be any higher on this list at under 30 minutes, but the songwriting's really strong, and I just hope he gets more ambitious on his next solo work. At number 29 is another late find for me this year. It's a very nocturnal album and one to throw on next time you take a midnight drive. And that is from a pretty central figure in the UK jazz renaissance and a member of the Ezra Collective. It's keyboardist Joe Armand Jones with the album All the Quiet Part 1. The year is 3999 and authoritarianism has rooted out all free expression. This place called the Citadel is the last place standing on Earth where music is made. That's the concept of this album, apparently. It's very rare that an album with the descriptors spiritual jazz and contemporary R&B would make my list, but it's 2025, I guess here we are. There are even a couple rap features. I know, but the majority of it is this sprawling, almost tropical jazz funk that I have a lot more time for. And I do really like the instrumental hip hop and dub influences here, the Dilla time on a track like Snake. And the bass lines are amazing across the track list. Pretty sick cover too, it reminds me of that King Giz album from this year. At number 28 is another album all about the bass lines. This is a scrappy, lo-fi, kind of garage, indie rock, little bedroom pop type of album called Tallulah's Tape by Good Flying Birds. This is indebted to Guided by Voices for sure, but I also hear The Strokes, I hear Teenage Fan Club in the DNA here, some early Parquet Courts. You got scuzzy guitars and a very demo-like quality, but like I said, the bass guitar is really the hero here. You'll hear that just in the first 4 or 5 tracks. At number 27 is a super promising debut full-length from a Berkeley-trained guitarist named Mae Simones. The album's called Anna Maru. Mae Simones' sound is a truly unique genre fusion. You got some jazz pop, some indie rock, math rock, chamber elements, some bossa nova thrown in there, some J-pop. She sings in both Japanese and English. All that stuff is in the DNA here. So I'm hearing some familiar pieces along the way, but it's one of those situations where the sum is truly greater than the parts. This is some super sophisticated playing with dynamics across the full spectrum. You know, you've got some really soft, smooth jazz kind of moments, and then some like sudden hyperactive bursts of sound. Her style itself, her sound, has so much promise that it just had to make the list. If the melodies were consistently stronger across the track list on the next one, we're talking album of the year material. In moments, I think this is the closest thing to filling a gap left by a band like Little Tybee. Number 26 on the list channels some 70s space rock, some krautrock, some futurism of a band like Tangerine Dream. It's a band Gusta Berling Saga with the album Forever Now. Some instrumental prog from the prog hotbed that is Scandinavia. Surprisingly, not Norway, but Sweden. You get kind of this, I don't know, Flash Gordon-esque grandeur on this album with these sci-fi synths like on the title track, strung together with acoustic fingerpicking and beautiful guitar arpeggiation. Tons of dynamic contrast. It's an instrumental album that tells a better story than many can with lyrics. At number 25 is a warm, communal, comforting indie rock alt country album with some ties to Wilco, with some ties to, I think of like Modest Mouse or maybe a little Whitney or Pinegrove. It's Nashville band Future Crib with Impossible Songs. I said communal, and I really mean that. You know, the band I know writes a lot of these things collaboratively. They're very DIY. They record to tape. They produce themselves. And that organic, analog, face-to-face music making ethos really seeps through this music. I love the tension of goofiness and a little absurdity with this very hard-on-your-sleeve earnestness. You know, it's very Wilco in that way. It sounds a little overly sentimental at this point, but in this age of AI slop and just, you know, a lot of uncertainty in that regard around the future of this industry, this sounds like a band doing band things. This sounds like humans making something real. At number 24 is one half of the band The Dodos, who I thought were kind of fading away, but Merrick Long keeps the dream alive with this album under his name, Kablooey. He said he followed his kid in a candy store impulses on this one. You know, lots of playing around in the studio, some weird sounds and instruments, a recording experience with playful spontaneity, with childlike wonder. But what I hear is the same very precise, very propulsive, driving indie rock and art pop as the Dodos. Jagged and thorny in spots, fast tempos, a cerebral toe tapper. At number 23 on the list is an album that truly shocked me when it came out, because I've had this band on my to-do list for a long time, but as a late 60s, early 70s progressive rock band. Their founding member, Robert Jan Stips, has revived the band some 50 years later. This is the Dutch prog band Super Sister with the album Nancy Never Knew. I love an album cover that looks like they missed the deadline and just kind of whipped it up on Microsoft Paint. This is a psychedelic jazz rock prog album most tied to the Canterbury prog scene. Luscious keyboard work and Farfisa organ, electric piano lead the charge. And instead of 12 disconnected tracks, this is a fluid journey with motifs and themes reappearing and ebbing and flowing throughout the album, you know, which makes it feel like a proper, cohesive prog listening experience. You really get the full spectrum between an atmospheric, beautiful piano track like Into the Moving Light and this jittery prog pop like Never in 100 Million Dreams, which just sounds like a Canterbury version of Dancing on a Volcano by Genesis. Next up is an album that shares its name with a now 40-year-old iconic movie. It's kind of black comedy horror. It's the album Gremlin by Jocko Jocko. Gremlin, singular. This is psychedelic pop with some modern indie pop sensibilities, some 70s AM rock, and a heavy dose of funk because this album grooves. I just love the sound so much, and I don't hear much of it anymore. I feel like it came in the 2010s and really peaked hard with bands like Unknown Mortal Orchestra or Mild High Club. Like Tony Aparo's album, this is under 30 minutes, so I'm really hoping he goes more ambitious on the next one, but it was just so fun, so infectious that it had to be on here. And that groovy playfulness, lightness to this album is really a front for some emotional complexity in the lyrics, some really deep lyrics of yearning and reflection. Next up at number 21 is one of my favorite bands of all time. They're really steeped in the pop punk, the post-hardcore of the early 2000s, but also the classic rock and metal of the 70s and 80s, but always progressive to the core, truly one of a kind. It's the 11th album by Coheed and Cambria called Vaxis 3, The Father of Make Believe. It's been a long time since those Lightning in a Bottle classic early albums, but Vaxis 3 is one of the brighter moments in the second act from the band. At this point in the band's career, some 25 years in, there's really a formula to a lot of what they do. Claudio's whole vibe, his lyrical approach, his song structures, his melodies, his album structures. If you're not a Coheed fan at this point, then just don't bother. Yet I deeply respect how prolific and optimistic Claudio and the boys are at this point. They're still searching for new ideas and new sparks and not resting on the strength of their brand and just playing the hits. And sparks do fly at moments on this thing. There are some truly chill-inducing moments that only Claudio could conjure. With so much variety across the track list, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the highs are really high for me. Searching for Tomorrow, Someone Who Can, One Last Miracle, The Flood, Tethered Together, top Coheed tracks. Ultimately, the dynamically flatlined, very compressed production is probably the biggest hindrance here. It's a glaring flaw in my opinion. At number 20 is a very young artist who's really captured the mainstream in a way that I'd never expect for someone playing this kind of jangly retro 60s pop, and that is Sharp Pins with Radio DDR. Sharp Pins is the solo project of Kai Slater from the Chicago band Lifeguard, who also put out an album this year, so this guy's busy. That prolific young energy comes across in these very off-the-cuff lo-fi recordings. There's a garage, a DIY aesthetic to the whole thing that's very different from the, at this point, polished Lemon Twig sound. Cut from the same cloth though, like I said, very jangly, chiming Rickenbacker guitar tones, power pop, think Kinks, Zombies, Big Star, definitely guided by voices. Again, that's a theme on this list. Its lack of polish is maybe part of the reason this is catching on, which comes across as very earnest, which could be contrived in its own right, but aesthetics and production aside, it's really the strength of the songs that interests me here. Really clever melodies and chord progressions, and I just expect better and better stuff to come. Joe Keery from Stranger Things rejoins his Chicago band at number 19. It's Post Animal with Iron. For the first time in my life. Classic rock's warm embrace will welcome you on Iron. It's a little bit psychedelia, a little progressive pop. Just a dash of distortion and Black Sabbath remains here as well, but it's at a level that I feel like the cigar connoisseur would call a note. It's slight, like on the song Setting Sun, you got some really meaty chugs on that thing. But just as much acoustic guitar and folk warmth on this thing as well. You know, the best moments give that sugar rush of McCartney, ELO, Fleetwood Mac. A road trip ready 2025 classic rock record that I enjoy every little nook and cranny of, you know, like all the little interludes and experiments totally work. But the straight down the middle 70s rock stuff is just done so incredibly well. It's vibrant, it's bright, it's fun. Next up is an album that has some power pop connections to Sharp Pins. It's an artist that references Beck and Prince and Todd Rundgren as influences. Sounds good to me. It's Harkness with Chow to the Beauty. Harkness reached out to me as a fan of the YouTube channel and sent me both of his albums, the first one and this one, and man, I was just blown away by this new one. And besides a couple guest spots, I think he takes great pride in performing and producing everything himself. You know, he sings, he plays guitar, he plays bass, he plays drums. It's a very diverse palette of colors and textures that all results in this quirky psychedelic pop alt rock that has connections to the Lemon Twigs, to Of Montreal. The songs The Same and View from the Moon are probably my two favorites on the album, and really a great just sample platter of what you get from Harkness. Two very different songs. An artist with some real heart, some real vision, and I'm very excited to see what's next. Next up is an artist at number 17 who totally slipped my mind since their 2021 album, which was really great. But then all of a sudden, pow, here's a new album from Graham Johnson, who calls himself Quickly Quickly, and the album's called I Heard the Noise. Quickly Quickly crafts a brew of this indie folk and folktronica and a little bit of neo-psych and slacker rock. You know, all that could be wrapped up into, I guess, bedroom pop. But it's not the typical indie wallpaper for your workday playlist kind of thing. You know, there's some really subtle but serious musicianship that doesn't really announce its presence, you know, like those tricky chord changes on anything or the really staccato bass line in the chorus. Production flourishes up the wazoo too, you know, whether it's a little xylophone here and there or these swirls of wind or whooshes of noise that make the stripped down moments of acoustic guitar and voice feel even weightier. And his voice does sound a little bit like Justin Vernon. At number 16 is maybe the best house music from the year, and not like the genre house, but just, you know, music you play in your house. It's the sixth album by the Texas folk rock indie rock band Midlake. It's called A Bridge Too Far. Not like too far, but too far. Midlake is just so coded for me, with a bunch of jazz musicians who turned into an indie rock band. The musical sophistication is there, yet their music has always felt a little too airy, a little too breezy for me to really latch onto. Except for that collaboration with John Grant on his first album. That's amazing. They're not changing their sound here, you know, it's kind of the same thing, but the songs just feel more resonant. The album blends acoustic guitar and flute, wind instruments, and mellotron, organ. It's lush and lovely and warm and organic, and does all those things that you'd expect an album with an earthy vibe to do. You know, it feels restorative to listen to, like my cells are healing or something. At number 15 is what's becoming a perennial soapbox for me on this channel. Like, I feel like I'm constantly like, how are we all ignoring the brilliance of Alex Latinsky and his project AM Overcast? This album's called Junk Drawer. It's an 18-minute album. I confess, if I need to be disqualified or something for picking an album that's half the length of a usual album, then go ahead. But this is what he does. AM Overcast is progressive pop punk. Succinct, direct. It's a straight sugar rush for anyone who likes math rock or pop punk. You know, you got these pop hooks with very tricky playing, and the average song is like 90 seconds or 2 minutes. It's hyperactive with these ideas that feel like what you might scrawl on a napkin when you're trying to remember a really great dream. At number 14 is an album that's similar to Future Crib in its alt country flavor, but with even more sonic variety. You got some grungy guitar passages, some orchestral power ballads, even some trip hop influences, some vocoder. It's Great Grandpa with Patience Moonbeam. This indie and art folk album just sounds like it took a ton of time to make. You know, there's a theme here running through my list of just authenticity and human touch. It's my first exposure to this Seattle 5-piece band and kind of a comeback album, as it's their first since 2019. They describe their reconnection as kind of like Newton's cradle. You know, it's like 5 pendulums who are swinging and then all of a sudden come into alignment. And being through my 20s now, that really resonates with me. You know, this idea that, life takes you this way and that, but you'll always reconnect and come back into orbit with the people who matter most. The sonic intricacies and emotional range of this album is incredible, and they've really filled a gap this year left by artists who didn't make the list, like Alex G, like Big Thief. All right, now for something totally different. This is a jazz fusion instrumental prog album that has some ties to Mahavishnu Orchestra, to the Dixie Dregs, to King Crimson. It's Wolves by Andre Drage. Pretty much right away, right from the get, with that psychedelic riff on the opening track, Potent Elixirs, I knew this one was making the list. It's a very frenetic fusion record with this ridiculous drumming from Andre, and furious guitar licks will be interrupted by screaming violin, and then everything will drop out and you get this super thick, mellow Rhodes chord. The closer, Brain Soup, is a good representation of just the constant intensity of this record. You know, it very much is in the tradition of Mahavishnu, with just that tension throughout, that feral energy, and the top album cover as well. I was one of the greatest benefactors of the lineup change from this next band, who went from a very personality first frontman to a very musicianship first trio of frontwomen. That is, of course, the British art rock band Black Country New Road with their new album Forever How Long. This album's most daring quality is its emphasis on sophisticated composition over flair and pomp and circumstance and just edginess. You know, I feel like it's a very substance over style choice. And it's one of the most egalitarian albums on the list, with great moments and artistic contributions from every single one of the now 6-piece band. You know, they're all mega talented. I'm kind of partial to Tyler Hyde's very theatrical, linear songwriting, her voice. But May Kershaw and Georgia Ellery are no slouches either. You know, Two Horses is a progressive folk classic, if you ask me. And For the Cold Country, lovely. There aren't really hooks or hits on this thing. You know, the closest thing is like Besties or maybe Salem Sisters, but just give it time. I feel like it has a ton of return on investment. I also love an album that has platonic love, you know, a deep love of friends at its core. And for my last album on this video, before I get to my top 10 in the next, this is a rock and roll trio who leans pretty heavily and knowingly into the very bubblegum stylings of 60s girl groups. It's Playin' Dumb by Tchotchke. clever name, clever visuals, clever album concept and cover. You even got a handmade board game with the vinyl package, and an amazing production from the Lemon Twigs, who, set the tone sonically with different synth and bass tones. And then there's a nice range of guitar led tracks, of keyboard led tracks, like they kind of alternate. And then just all these bells and whistles all over the place. There's tons of studio trickery and ear candy piled atop. But most importantly, super smart musicianship and sweet melodies. You can have the prettiest decoration, piping on the cake, but if the bake isn't good, it's all a dud. So they definitely got that right on this album. The core melodies and progressions are really interesting, really catchy. So yeah, the Lemon Twigs are behind the board on this one, but it's all driven by the artistry of Tchotchke. It's their vision, their songs, their vocal arrangements, and brilliant performances. And that brings us to the end of this part one of my top albums of 2025. I hope you found something you really love in this list. I feel like there's just a ton of variety in this one this year. So go ahead and let me know what I missed and what you have in your top list. Go ahead and check out those vinyl giveaway details down in the description box. Like I said, 2 winners will get 2 records each. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching.